coming up.
What are you doing differently? You say you need to do more. Well, clearly nothing much has changed in the last 9 years. What is the more?
The more is
Par plus, j'entends l'investissement de ressources importantes.
Hold on. To see more. Second. It's a translation issue.
When I'm talking about a story about Kevin and Malaya, people that are actually living in squalor because of this minister's inaction.
Mr. Chair.
If that's taking too much time, I apologize.
I have no problem with the time of the question.
To answer the questions we are asking of him.
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
Minister Fraser, you just mentioned about your desire to keep doing more. However, this is the fourth Auditor General report on Indigenous housing, and yet there has been little to no improvement, according to her report. Where are the homes you promised?
So there are tens of thousands of homes that have been built or repaired since we formed government through the programs that we've advanced. I would accept the recommendations of the Auditor General, which don't remain uniform as between reports. And in fact, one of the reasons that it's essential we maintain that position is so that we can have continued assessment of where we at vis-a-vis where we need to be. So the specific homes that you're asking about would depend on each community. There's members represented here who have homes in their communities today that did not exist a number of years ago, and we need to accelerate the pace of that delivery.
So according to the report here, 55,320 housing units are needed to be built now until 2030 to keep on track. However, from 2018 to now, only 4,379 or 8% of the units have been completed, 13% are in progress, and 79% are still needed. So again, Minister, where are the homes?
So as I mentioned, it will depend on which community you're talking about. We need to increase the pace of construction, and there's some irony in the question coming from a member whose party has a history of not making investments in housing in Indigenous communities.
Well, Minister, according to the Auditor General, there has been little to no improvement in the last four Auditor General reports, and last time I checked, you've been here for 9 years, and yet we are still dealing with the same problem. So again, where are the homes?
With respect, over those 9 years, every time there was an opportunity to support or vote for more investments in housing for Indigenous communities, you have voted against them. It's ironic for you to sit here and pretend to be a champion for Indigenous housing when your voting history has gone in the opposite direction.
It still does not let you off the hook for the past 9 years. Where are the homes?
There are tens of thousands of homes that have been added to the housing supply in Indigenous communities as a result of the investments we've made. Do we need to do more?
So the
yes, absolutely.
Little to nothing has changed. So you keep saying you have to do more, and it seems the track record of this government is to spend money and use that as their talking point, but outcomes have not been changing, and that's the thing we should be actually focusing on.
So I agree that we should be focusing on outcomes, but when I compare outcomes of tens of thousands of new homes existing compared to the 99 new homes that were built while your leader was the housing minister, it's clear there is no contest. Moreover, it's not reasonable for a Conservative MP to show up this committee and ask to do more on Indigenous housing when you have voted against money for Indigenous housing at every opportunity.
Well, you and your government have said Indigenous communities are the most important relationship. However, little to nothing has changed on the housing file. This is still substandard housing in many communities, and you're not even on track to meet the goals that you say you want to achieve. So again, what are you doing differently? You say you need to do more. Well, clearly nothing much has changed in the last 9 years. What is the more?
The more is
Par plus, j'entends l'investissement de ressources importantes dans la construction de logements pour les collectivités autochtones et aussi autonomiser ces communautés pour qu'elles décident comment cet investissement s'articule dans le concret. Ça, c'était pas du tout là dans la plateforme conservatrice. Nous, on va de l'avant avec un changement.
Hold on. To see more. Second one. It's a translation issue. How does this happen so often? Good. I'll go.
Okay.
Can I continue?
We can continue your time. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, it was the Residential Construction Council of Ontario that said there was no way the feds would meet their housing targets. So again, where are the homes you promised? 79% of units are still needed.
Mr. Chair, it's only been a few minutes and we've already seen the Conservative member move off the issue of Indigenous housing, much like they did while they had the opportunity to make investments and chose not to.
Well, I figure you're not going to answer the
Within
question,
2
so I
minutes,
might as well try another
we're here on a
topic
study
to try
to
to
tackle
get
the housing needs of
Chair,
Indigenous
it's my
communities.
time. Can I reclaim that time, please, Chair?
So you have your time. You still have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. So again, maybe we'll focus on the actual question I just asked. The Residential Construction Council of Ontario said there was no way the federal government would meet their housing targets. So again, where are the homes?
Mr. Chair, I have 2 points in response. First of all, we've been at this committee for about 3 minutes now, and the Conservatives have already changed the subject from Indigenous housing, much as they avoided it while they were last in office.
Chair.
Second, and he keeps interrupting to ruin the audio because he's embarrassed of the answer here, and he should be embarrassed because, Mr. Chair, do I have the floor? I want to respect the interpreter, but this is inappropriate.
Order, please. We got to think of the interpreters here when we're having this types of crosstalk happening. The interpretation is not getting through. I'm listening to the French interpretation right now, and it's difficult when we have two people talking. So if we can just have one at a time, please. Mr. Smale, your time's back to you.
Thank you very much. Again, rent has doubled, housing has doubled, housing costs have doubled, food bank usage is at record highs. Minister, we're talking about housing that, by all accounts, many of the people actually building housing say your government has no plan and will not reach your target. So again, it's a simple question, Minister. Where are the housing? Where are the houses?
Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair, rather, now that I have the floor, I trust I can make this point without interruption. This is a study about the housing needs of Indigenous communities across this country. It has been a few minutes, and the Conservatives are now resorting to reading questions off their phone, off topic, because they feel like they can't have a serious conversation about this issue. There was years where they had the opportunity to make the investments and chose not to. Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm being spoken over. Every time I make this argument, he talks over me. Do I have the floor?
I'm not going to let him take my time.
Mr. Chair, do I have the floor?
You have the floor.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, with respect to my friend and colleague, he had many years as his party in office to make investments or not make investments in Indigenous housing. They chose not to. Now he has an opportunity to ask questions about it, and instead he's looking at his phone to ask questions he's reading from the leader's office, rather than actually engaging on the issue of housing in Indigenous communities. It's inappropriate.
Well, Chair,
with respect, again, he says we have no plan, and again, he's talking over. He's very uncomfortable with this argument. He says we have no plan. Mr. Chair, do I have the floor?
Chair, I want to reclaim my time.
Mr. Chair, do I have the floor?
30 seconds.
Do I have the floor?
This is not answering my question. He doesn't get to
Mr. Chair, sorry, there's been no point of order. Do I have the floor?
You do have the floor.
Thank you. I have respected my colleague while he was speaking. I would appreciate if he would return the professional courtesy. He suggested we don't have a plan. We literally published a plan in April of this year. He may think it's foreign because the plan that he put forward as a party has no measures in it that will actually build more homes. With respect, we have...
Point of order. Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Chair. I would suggest that the member, Mr. Smale, be able to ask his question. It's his time. And the minister is going on and talking about other
nonsense.
Things. So he needs to be able to reclaim his time to be able to speak and ask questions.
So, Mr. Smale, you still have, I'll give you one more question, okay?
Thank you very much. Chair, I appreciate the opportunity. Again, we are not seeing your targets met on for non-First Nations or Indigenous communities and across the country. There have been no targets being met. You're not on track anywhere in this country to meet your housing targets. You say you have to do more, fine, but the last 4 Auditor General's report said nothing has changed. So I want to know specifically what is going to change.
So first, with respect to the issue of targets, the targets outlined in the National Housing Strategy under our bilateral agreements and affordable housing investments have delivered more units than were set out as a goal at the outset. But we need to do more, as I've mentioned repeatedly, and we have broadcasted a series of measures in the recent housing plan that are going to increase the investments. The Conservatives seem to struggle with the idea that you should set a target that's going to solve a problem, not one that your measures are going to lead to anyway. A final comment, because I expect I'm going to run out of time. During the last exchange, I should point out when one of the members said something about what I was talking about, the questioner has said it was nonsense. Investments in housing for Indigenous peoples in this country is not nonsense. It may appear that way given the questions today and the history of the Conservative Party, but for the record, the government takes a different view.
My questions will be for Minister Fraser. I was recently in Iqaluit just a few months ago. I met Kevin and his wife, Malaya. Kevin used to be a truck driver at a Nunavut mine, but is now out of a job due to the mine closing. He wanted a better life for his family, so he moved away from the rougher part of town where drugs and alcohol were prevalent. They moved into a small government-funded house with their daughter and 3 young grandsons in 2011. Yet, Kevin and Malaya showed me there is mold in every corner. The bathroom plumbing is backed up and has been broken and has been that way broken for the last few years. He has had to cover every window with plastic to stop the frigid drafts to keep his family warm. And in one case, there's a kitchen window that if he didn't keep it closed, his grandchildren could fall 15 feet down and be severely harmed as a result. The siding is falling off. The floors are falling apart. Malaya has had bad asthma and is often triggered by the ever-present mold. Minister, would you call this a success or a failure?
Anytime you're dealing with living conditions like you've just described, I think it's a signal that greater level of investment needs to follow. Now, to be clear, Mr. Chair, do I have the floor? About the roughly the same amount of time as the questioner?
It's whether it was a success or a failure.
Mr. Chair, do I have the floor, and do I have as much time as the questioner?
Allow the minister to answer your question, please.
So I want to be careful when you're dealing with issues that are managed by Indigenous partners or territorial partners without having had the chance to discuss this specific issue with those who manage the program and labeling their work as a failure. And I hope you would not necessarily attribute that to them the way you've put it in your question. But I think anytime you see that quality of housing, it demands greater investment. So we'll continue to increase the resources for our partners who manage these issues, including presumably the project that you're referring to.
Minister, the question was to you. I'm not asking you to answer questions based on the other housing authorities that are in Nunavut. I'm asking because the federal government has a responsibility around housing, and I asked you a simple question whether it was a success or a failure. It clearly is a failure. I'll move on to my second question. Minister, you have been in government for 9 years, almost a decade. Are you familiar with the 2023 Northern Housing Report?
Yes.
Okay. From the report, 80% of families in Nunavut can't afford to buy a house. 51% of families can't even afford to rent a place to live. The average price of a single detached home reached a historical high of $724,504, which was an increase of almost 20% over the previous year. As of April this year, only 55% of residents have a job. Construction is down, residential construction is down, non-residential construction is down. The simple truth is the houses are not getting built, and you know that, Minister. And this is from a minister who's promising 4 million houses across the country. There's a need for at least 3,000 or more houses in Nunavut. It's not getting done. I'll read an article. Actually, Minister, I'll get back to my time is short. Would you call this, Minister, your housing record in Nunavut a success or a failure?
Mr. Speaker, again, just confirming I have time to answer this question given the length of the question that was put to me. I always ask myself a motivation behind certain questions. Mr. Chair, do I have the floor? I'm interrupted every time I raise the Conservatives' record on Indigenous housing.
There's a point of order that's been raised.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Zimmer.
There's no, when we come here as opposition to question the minister for, they've been here for 9 years, houses are not getting built. I'm getting to it. And then we're questioned about the time and length of our question. When I'm talking about a story about Kevin and Malaya, people that are actually living in squalor because of this minister's inaction.
Mr. Chair.
If that's taking too much time, I apologize.
I have no problem with the time of the question.
To answer the questions we are asking of him.
I don't believe that's a point of order.
It's not a point of order. I agree with you. Moreover, I have no problem with the length of the question. I actually wish the previous questioner spent as much time on Indigenous housing. What I have problems with is the Conservatives trying to shut down an answer that may be uncomfortable for them. Because what I hear behind that question, coming from a member who opposes the very investments that are designed to address the needs he's raising in his question, when I know that he stands and votes against those measures, I ask myself, is he trying to score a point or to solve a problem? It's clear his interest is to score a political political point, because when the Conservatives had an opportunity to make investments to build housing in Indigenous communities, they chose not to. When they have an opportunity to vote for or against investments to build more housing, they vote against. I will take with a grain of salt the continued interruptions, because this is uncomfortable given the historic record of Conservatives withdrawing investments when it comes to housing in Indigenous communities. So question away, take as much time as you would like, but let's engage in a real conversation rather than a cheap shot for Facebook.
You know, I've claimed my time back for the last minute because he's just been running off on an answer talking about a previous Conservative government. The questions are to the government that's been in power for 10 years, okay? His responsibility as minister to answer my question. And when you're not recognizing that I'm trying to claim back my time, Mr. Chair, you know, it's our time, it's not the minister's, okay?
I understand that, and you still have the minute and a half.
Okay.
It's not a point of order. That's not a point of order.
So is it my time?
Yes. Continue.
Okay, can I?
We need a card system, I think.
Do I have my time?
It's running.
Okay. So, Minister, you haven't answered my question twice now. I've asked whether the previous two examples have been a success or a failure. You deliberately aren't answering that as success or failure. You're saying we're just going to throw more money at it or make bigger promises. Your government can't even plant 2 billion trees, and yet you're going to promise to build 4 million houses? You know, so it's still my question. So from an article from Nunavut, this is around the housing units promised in Taliwak, including 2 5-plexes, still haven't been built because they're coming in at an extremely high cost of $1.1 million per unit. This is a quote. They were all just way too expensive, Kuzagak said. The Housing Corporation just doesn't have that type of money. This isn't the first time in recent years the Nunavut government has canceled projects due to the rising costs. Guess why? Canada's rising inflation rate, high fuel prices, and supply chain delays have affected construction in the territory. So, Minister, you're going to say it's not my responsibility, not my fault. You've been in government for almost a decade. It's all your fault.
Mr. Chair, I didn't hear a question at the end of that. However, I would point out that we're dealing with...
Has this been
Mr. Chair, do I have the floor?
Housing,
okay, order, please. Take my direction from you.
Mr. Zimmer,
Minister.
there's 10 seconds. Just, Mr. Fraser, a short answer, and then we have to move on.
We have built more than 22,000 homes in Indigenous communities through the programs we've introduced since 2015. The Conservative government had a $300 million fund that had 99. I will not take lessons on delivery when it comes to housing in Indigenous communities from someone who votes against every one of the policies it would support when he's clearly motivated by his political interest rather than trying to help vulnerable communities.